with some cos theta, sin theta, cos theta is a reducible matrix or a reducible representation. In the sense that it seems to be two separate representations being there, not getting mixed with each other, doing their own business, and we could have with upper corner 2 by 2 matrices. The 3 by 3 corner entries 1 can be understood as and it is the same entry in all the matrices. So it as the trivial representation all the elements this representation is reducible, is unfaithful. But also irreducible. Right, you can't reduce 1 any further, so the representation is irreducible but it is unfaithful. The upper corners, the 6 distinct matrices provide a faithful and irreducible representation. This short form irrep is very common for saving one the trouble of writing irreducible representation. So those provide faithful irreducible representation. So generically reducible representation has the form of a block matrix. Okay, so it can be 3 by 3, it can be 2 by 2, it can be 1 by 1. And then these entries all have to be 0 matrices of corresponding sizes. Okay. So this is called a reducible representation. In terms of the carrier space, those components or those planes don't mix with the other planes. The vectors in this part of the list don't mix with vectors in that part of the list, and vectors here don't mix. So in terms of so this is a 3 entries, 2 entries and 1 entry, one component, and those don't mix. when it is a reducible representation. Alright, so now let us write down a few things a little bit in advance. What we are going to do next, we will see the important theorems. One nice fact is that you can always represent such matrices by unitary matrices. And in other words, there exists a similarity. If you are stuck with some arbitrary representation which is not looking like unitary matrices, you can always do a similarity transformation and make it unitary. If not, okay. Then there are two interesting theorems. So I forgot to write the notation, but I'll write it now. These are called Schur's lemmas, and there is some variation in various books in what they call them, but one of them is certainly the more important Schur's lemma, the other one is relatively simple. So given a representation or given an irreducible representation d alpha, so when we write d alpha, we usually mean d is meant to represent, so let us write d alpha of g, where g are group elements, and then I put curly brackets to mean the whole group represented by this set of matrices, and alpha usually denotes the size of vector space, the carrier space. So i.e. d is alpha by alpha, and g is of course the group element. So we usually write it like this and often explicitly display the indices on d. Okay. So we will come to that later. What this lemma says is, given a particular irreducible representation, and if there is A, matrix A, such that d alpha g A is equal to A d alpha g for all g in G, then this A has to be proportional to identity. Times a constant. So this might remind you a little bit about quantum mechanics, but we'll come to see specifically how it applies. The more non-trivial lemma that Schur proved, so this lemma looks a little simplistic, you know. You say, okay, if a matrix commutes with every possible matrix in your representation and the representation is irreducible, we know in group theory there is only one element that will commute. If for an arbitrary group which is not abelian, if there is a matrix which commutes with every single matrix in the, any element that commutes with every single element, we know it has to be identity because no other element will do it. So it is no great surprise that A has to be identity if this is fact for a general group. But a more non-trivial lemma, which also again looks a bit innocuous, but it's really powerful, as we will say it later, is representation matrices can always be chosen to be unitary, and if not, if you are handed some representation which doesn't look like unitary matrices, there will always exist a similarity transformation that will make it unitary. So there will always exist, if this D I am already choosing to be, but it doesn't matter, yeah. So if D tilde dagger is not equal to D tilde, D dagger equal to 1, so yeah, so this is not equal to D tilde inverse, then there exists S such that S D tilde S inverse equal to D, where D is unitary. I should have used another paper, but sorry, no, my D equal to D inverse. And this is for all the G in the group, okay. So for all D of G. So the tilde representation, which is something arbitrary, can always be made unitary by a similarity transformation. So hopefully that I prove before we end today. Okay. But I am telling you in advance some of the things as preview. So Schur's lemma for the more general case is when I have D alpha and then I have A equal to A and then D beta, where beta is not necessarily the same rep. So here remember I said you have a given representation D alpha, and I find that given a particular group element D, its representation matrix D is such that A commutes with it, and then this A commutes with all the representation matrices in that particular representation. Now this more general thing says, suppose I have two different representations, okay, D alpha and D beta, and there is a matrix A satisfying this for all G. Then the statement is that either we have to go back to the previous case, or A has to be 0. So, we will see this and in more detail later. There is the third fact, the third thing which is going to make our knowledge of group theory much more impressive is called great orthogonality theorem. Since it is stated here, I can, in the notation of these slides, uses capital gamma instead of D. D is something, I think physicists use D. Anyway, I am used to it, but that's the only difference. So, consider all inequivalent irreducible unitary representations gamma I of R of a group, and his all notation is different. So, group G, ours we write small g1, g2, etc. So, sum over all G of d alpha G and d beta G. So, there is summation over group elements, and it could be some two different representations. If you do this, then this product, this summation over all G will produce a delta delta delta, in the sense that M has to match O, N has to match P, and the representation index, the size of the representations also has to match delta Ij, and there is a front factor which is order of the group as a whole and divided by the size of the representation over which you are doing this sum. So, since anyway I has to be set equal to j, it is the common value of L. So, let me write it in our notation. Sum over all group elements G, d alpha, and here we put, since it is a matrix, it is a unitary matrix, and star d beta. So, this star is on the matrix as a whole, a matrix element as a whole, d beta of ijkl of G is equal to delta alpha beta delta ik and delta jl, and with a front factor which is order of the group G and divided by, let us call it d alpha, dimension of the representation alpha. I think rest is clear. And for this is for the unitary representations. This is going to be a very, very powerful theorem, because it says that the matrices in any irrep have to be constrained in this particular way. So, in some sense it is like imposing conditions on all the rows and columns of all the representations, but there is a summation over all G. So, if you have a so it is some statement of this kind, that if I have a D of some G which is looking like this, then it is a statement about the column vectors and row vectors in this when I sum over all G and multiply the corresponding elements. Okay. So, that is what it is. I have to draw the corresponding d beta, but it is going to be essentially a statement about the representations matching. Alpha has to be beta and the row wise and column wise you have to have so, and you can think of this summation over G by stacking up all the elements G above it. So, it is a sum of elements of this kind. For finite size representations, I am not sure. As you know, our knowledge will extend to the large number like 6 in, and the irreps will be size 3. What we saw is pretty much what we are actually going to handle, but it illustrates the general things, and you can always look up the tables. Okay, so now I think I will spend some time proving this theorem that you can always make a representation unitary. And I forgot my notes, so I hope that I remember all the steps. So the proof is constructive proof. So we are looking for such that D dagger equal to D inverse. So we write this statement as, consider the statement that S squared D tilde S inverse squared is equal to S D S inverse, and then we write it in the form. So no, wait, so let us just rewrite this, probably this is not the correct step. So let us write this out first. So D dagger from here, D dagger is equal to S inverse dagger D tilde dagger S dagger, and that should be equal to D inverse, which is equal to, again referring to this, but that S inverse inverse becomes S inverse, D tilde inverse S inverse. So we need a, so we can rewrite this as a condition on a requirement for S. So the construct that works So now what we do is that we can rewrite this statement by transferring, yes. So we make one further assumption that S dagger is equal to S. So we try to look for S which is Hermitian. Okay. Then the statement 2 is of the form S inverse D tilde dagger S equal to S d tilde inverse S inverse, and therefore it is equivalent to, i.e. need S such that S inverse square d tilde dagger S squared is equal to d tilde inverse. And I forgot the most important part, for some specific G, and of course it is true for every G. For every G. So now we have proposed that S squared is of this form. So consider and now this was G, let us write some H and write this summation. So S squared inverse is, so what we do is that we try to convert it into a property for S squared. So take this statement and write it, multiply on the left by S squared and on the right by d tilde. Okay. So we have rewritten this. By simply multiplying on the right by d tilde. So this d tilde inverse comes here, this S square remains here, this is here, and S inverse squared makes it S squared. Okay, so this is what we are trying to check. So then so question is d tilde dagger G, and then let us say summation over H, and our proposal for this is d tilde dagger H d tilde H. So we substituted S squared and then put d tilde G. Now we take the d G inside. So this is the question, is it equal to S squared? And then once we take it inside, it becomes summation over H. Then we have d tilde dagger G into d tilde dagger H and d tilde H d tilde G. But now remember that as far as the d dagger goes, because the representation is as far as this goes, this is same as d tilde of Hg, and this becomes d tilde of Hg. Because this reverse multiplication just produces the corresponding representation of the Hg element applied in sequence. But now all you have to do, this is summation over the whole group, this H, this summation ran over all the group elements. This is only relabeling the summation because a constant G is multiplying all of them on the right. So this is same as summation over some H prime of d tilde dagger H prime d tilde H prime, but that is equal to S squared. Okay. So if we were given any arbitrary d tilde, all we do is, so this is a constructive proof. Okay, this is what is called a constructive proof. Some proofs in mathematics are such that they give you no clue how to actually carry it out, they just prove the existence. But this actually constructs explicitly for you for what you should do. You take your funny representation d tilde which is not unitary and just construct this matrix S squared, which is summation over all group elements of their corresponding d dagger d. So finally you can say S has to be the square root of G. So instead of writing a new transparency, I will just say here we shall take S equal to the square root matrix of now since the matrix products d dagger d are all going to be positive, so this is going to be non-trivial matrix and you can take its square root in the sense of the square root of matrices is defined, there is not a problem, okay, so long as the determinant is non-zero. So you can take the square root and that is what will work as the matrix that will render any representation unitary. So this is one of the first theorems and the kind of trick we have used is going to be repeated for other things that we will prove. So in closing, let me just say the next interesting thing is that the word character when used for rep seems a little strange, but we will later see that it actually represents some characteristics of a molecule, so that's why probably it comes. In mathematical term it's very simple, it's the trace of the matrix representing the element. So character chi of G is equal to trace of, so chi alpha G is trace of d alpha G. In the representation alpha representing a matrix element G, the character is just the trace of that matrix. And one thing we can immediately see that the conjugacy classes, all elements in a given conjugacy class will have same character. This is because conjugacy relation was that G2 is equal to some H G1 H inverse, then G1 and G2 are in same conjugacy class. But now we have to write out d alpha of G2 equal to d alpha of H G1 d alpha of G1 and then H inverse, but because we are using a representation is unitary which is same as d dagger, but anyway, so d alpha inverse of H. But you remember that under trace under similarity transformation trace doesn't change. So the character will come out to be the same. Okay. So what was in group theory language some abstract concept of conjugacy classes. In matrix language it is simply similarity transformation, and so the character will remain the same. So this is, we will see that this is an important thing. This is why the number of elements in a conjugacy class is important. They can and we also know geometrically that conjugacy basically means the same kind of operation done after something else. Like the mirror flip is essentially a conjugacy class, because everything in it is, whether you have rotated once or rotated twice, the flips you do later are essentially the same things. So the sigma v prime, double prime and sigma v double prime, they will be all in the same conjugacy class. In fact, we can see that. So you can see this sigma v prime, sigma v double prime, sigma v triple prime, the trace is 0, okay, the trace is 0, trace is 0. So all three are essentially same kind of transformations, they are flips. It's just that one is around this axis, one is around that axis, one is around that axis. So geometrically conjugacy class contains elements that do essentially the same thing. Okay, it's just that they got mixed up through some other transformations earlier, like a rotation, and then their character will come out to be the same. The character of these two is equal to minus 1. So sorry, minus 1, and there is an overall half. So including the, this is a, I think this factor half is not correct outside, since there is already a minus half inside. So the trace of this is equal to minus 1 plus 1. So if you include this silly extra, so this is a reducible representation, and in the reducible representation, the way we define character so far didn't say whether it is for reducible or irreducible, but I can tell you that it will, when we get to when we restrict to irreducible representation, it gives a more reliable representation of which conjugacy class you are in. And you will find, well, in fact in this case, because these two add up to 0, we are, the trace of all these three is plus 1, whereas trace of these two is actually 0 because the upper is 0. The trace of the identity element is always equal to size of the representation, because it has ones, as many ones as the representation space on which it is, on the carrier space on which it is acting. Okay, so we'll stop here today.